When my controlling boyfriend Marcus looked me straight in the eyes after I suggested we needed to talk about the toxic patterns in our relationship and coldly declared, "You're nothing without me," his words hit like a physical blow that knocked the breath from my lungs and shattered whatever remaining illusions I had been clinging to about his capacity for love, respect, or basic human decency toward the woman who had been supporting him financially, emotionally, and professionally for the past 3 years, while he systematically destroyed my confidence and isolated me from friends and family who might have helped me recognize the abuse I was enduring. The cruelty in his voice as he delivered this devastating assessment of my worth was matched only by his obvious satisfaction at watching me absorb the impact of words that were designed to crush my spirit and remind me of my supposed dependence on his presence in my life, despite the fact that our relationship had become a one-sided arrangement where I provided everything from rent money and groceries to career connections and emotional support, while receiving nothing in return except criticism, manipulation, and the kind of psychological warfare that had gradually eroded my sense of self-worth and independence over months of systematic abuse disguised as love. What Marcus didn't realize as he savored his moment of perceived power and control was that his cruel declaration had finally provided the clarity and motivation I needed to take action that would demonstrate exactly who was dependent on whom in our toxic relationship. And by the next morning, he would discover that the woman he believed was nothing without him was perfectly capable of changing the locks on the house that she owned and had been paying for entirely with her own income, while he contributed nothing except demands, complaints, and the constant emotional terrorism that had nearly broken her spirit, but had ultimately failed to destroy her strength and determination to reclaim her life from someone who had mistaken her kindness for weakness and her love for desperation. The relationship with Marcus had begun 18 months earlier when we met at a coffee shop near the marketing agency where I worked as a senior account manager, a position I had earned through years of hard work, excellent performance, and the kind of professional reputation that had made me one of the most successful and respected employees in our competitive industry, where results mattered more than office politics or personal connections. Marcus had approached me with what seemed like genuine interest in getting to know me as a person, asking thoughtful questions about my work, my interests, and my goals for the future, while sharing stories about his own background as a freelance photographer who was working to build his portfolio and establish himself in the competitive world of commercial and artistic photography that required both technical skill and business acumen to succeed. The early stages of our relationship had been marked by what I interpreted as romantic gestures and attentive behavior that made me feel valued and appreciated in ways I hadn't experienced in previous relationships with men who had seemed more interested in what I could do for them than in who I was as a person with my own dreams, ambitions, and need for mutual respect and support in building something meaningful together. Marcus's apparent interest in my work and his encouragement of my professional success had seemed refreshing after dating men who were threatened by my career achievements or who expected me to diminish my own ambitions to make them feel more important and secure in their masculinity. The transition from romantic courtship to controlling behavior had been so gradual and subtle that I hadn't recognized the warning signs until the patterns of manipulation and emotional abuse had become deeply entrenched in our daily interactions, and my responses to his demands and criticisms had become automatic, rather than conscious choices about how I wanted to be treated by someone who claimed to love me. The initial requests for small favors and occasional financial assistance had seemed reasonable and temporary, presented as short-term help for someone who was working to establish his career, and who would eventually be able to contribute equally to our relationship once his photography business became more stable and profitable. The photography business that Marcus claimed to be building never materialized beyond a few small projects and amateur shoots that generated minimal income, while consuming enormous amounts of time and resources that he expected me to provide without question or complaint about the lack of progress toward the financial independence and professional success he had promised was just around the corner. His expensive camera equipment, studio rental fees, and marketing materials were funded entirely by my income from the marketing job that I worked diligently to maintain and advance, while also managing our household expenses, relationship responsibilities, and the emotional labor required to keep Marcus happy and motivated in his increasingly unrealistic pursuit of photography success. The isolation from friends and family had begun with Marcus's subtle criticisms of the people who had been important in my life before our relationship, suggesting that they didn't understand our connection or support his artistic vision in ways that created doubt about their loyalty and genuine concern for my happiness and well-being. His complaints about my friend's behavior during social gatherings gradually escalated into demands that I limit my contact with people who might question his treatment of me or point out the obvious imbalance in our relationship where I was providing everything while receiving nothing except criticism and emotional manipulation, disguised as caring concern for my development as a person and partner. The financial control had developed through a series of requests and arrangements that started with occasional help with rent or groceries, but eventually encompassed virtually every aspect of our shared living expenses, while Marcus contributed nothing except promises about future success and complaints about my allegedly unreasonable expectations for reciprocity and partnership in managing our household and relationship responsibilities. His explanations for why he couldn't contribute financially always involved temporary setbacks or unexpected expenses related to his photography work, creating a pattern where my income was treated as our shared resource, while his minimal earnings were protected as personal funds that couldn't be used for mundane expenses like food, utilities, or the mortgage payments on the house I owned and had been paying for independently since before our relationship began. The house that had become the center of our domestic arrangements was a 3-bedroom craftsman-style home that I had purchased 2 years before meeting Marcus, using savings from my successful marketing career and a careful investment strategy that had allowed me to build wealth and financial security while maintaining the independence and self-sufficiency that had always been important to my sense of identity and personal satisfaction. The home represented years of hard work and responsible financial planning, serving as both a comfortable living space and a significant investment that provided stability and options for my future, regardless of what happened in my personal relationships or professional circumstances. Marcus's move into my house had been presented as a temporary arrangement, while he looked for his own place and established his photography business. But the timeline for his independence kept extending as he found excuses and reasons why he couldn't afford his own housing while simultaneously expecting to be treated as an equal partner in decisions about our shared living space and household management. His presence in my home had gradually transformed from a welcome addition to our relationship into a source of stress and resentment as he made demands about decorating, entertaining, and lifestyle choices, without contributing to the expenses or responsibilities associated with homeownership and household maintenance. The emotional manipulation that characterized Marcus's approach to our relationship involved a sophisticated combination of criticism, gaslighting, and emotional blackmail that was designed to keep me doubting my own perceptions and dependent on his approval for my sense of self-worth and confidence in my abilities as both a professional and a partner. His pattern of alternating between cruel criticism and affectionate praise created a psychological dependency where I found myself constantly seeking his validation while walking on eggshells to avoid triggering the anger and disappointment that he used as weapons to control my behavior and maintain his position of power in our increasingly dysfunctional relationship. The professional sabotage had been one of the most damaging aspects of Marcus's controlling behavior, as he systematically undermined my confidence and performance at work through constant criticism of my colleagues, my boss, and the value of my contributions to projects and client relationships that had been sources of pride and satisfaction throughout my career. His suggestions that I was being taken advantage of by my employer, or that my success was due to luck rather than skill, gradually eroded my confidence and enthusiasm for the work that had always been a source of identity and financial independence. The social isolation that Marcus had engineered through his criticism and manipulation of my relationships with friends and family had left me increasingly dependent on his approval and companionship, while cutting off access to outside perspectives that might have helped me recognize the abusive patterns in our relationship and find support for making changes that would restore my independence and self-respect. His demands for my exclusive attention and loyalty had been presented as evidence of his love and commitment, but had actually served to eliminate potential sources of support and validation that might have challenged his control over my emotions and decisions. The financial dependency that Marcus had worked to create through his refusal to contribute to our shared expenses, while simultaneously encouraging me to spend money on his needs and interests, had been designed to make me feel that ending our relationship would result in financial hardship or instability that would be worse than continuing to tolerate his abuse and manipulation. His suggestions that I couldn't afford to maintain my lifestyle without his emotional support and companionship ignored the obvious reality that I had been financially independent and successful before our relationship, and that his presence had actually increased rather than decreased my expenses and financial stress. The confrontation that led to Marcus's declaration that I was nothing without him had begun when I attempted to have an honest conversation about the patterns in our relationship that were causing me unhappiness and preventing us from building the kind of partnership I had hoped we could create together. My request for changes in his behavior and contributions to our household had been met with defensive anger, and accusations that I was being unreasonable and unsupportive of his artistic pursuits and professional development that required my patience and understanding, rather than demands for immediate reciprocity and conventional relationship structures. The escalation to his cruel assessment of my worth and value as a person had occurred when I persisted in expressing my needs and concerns, despite his attempts to deflect responsibility and blame me for the problems in our relationship that were clearly the result of his selfish behavior and refusal to treat me with the respect and consideration that should characterize any healthy partnership between equals who care about each other's well-being and happiness. His decision to attack my self-worth and independence was a desperate attempt to reassert control and dominance in a relationship where his abuse was finally being recognized and challenged by someone who was beginning to remember her own strength and value. The moment when Marcus delivered his devastating declaration about my supposed dependence on him was also the moment when the fog of manipulation and gaslighting finally cleared from my mind, and I saw our relationship with the clarity that had been obscured by months of psychological abuse and emotional terrorism, designed to keep me confused and dependent on someone who had never loved or respected me, but had simply used me as a source of financial support and ego gratification while giving nothing meaningful in return. The cruelty of his words was so extreme and revealing of his true character that it broke through the last barriers of denial and hope that had kept me trapped in a situation that was destroying my health, happiness, and sense of self-worth. The decision to change the locks on my house was made in the moments following Marcus's cruel declaration, as I realized that someone who could speak to me with such contempt and disregard for my feelings and contributions had forfeited any right to share my living space or benefit from my generosity and support that had been sustaining our relationship, while he contributed nothing except abuse and manipulation disguised as love and partnership. The practical arrangements for securing my home and protecting my belongings required immediate action to prevent Marcus from returning to continue his psychological warfare or to remove valuable items that belonged to me as compensation for what he would undoubtedly claim were his losses from our ended relationship. The locksmith who responded to my emergency call that evening was professional and efficient, replacing all the exterior locks on my house with high-security systems that would prevent unauthorized entry, while also providing me with the peace of mind that comes from knowing that someone who had been using threats and manipulation to control my behavior would no longer have access to my private space where I could begin the process of healing and rebuilding my sense of safety and independence. The cost of the emergency locksmith service was a small price to pay for the immediate protection and psychological relief that came from taking concrete action to remove an abusive person from my living space and daily life. The security system upgrade that I arranged for the following day provided additional protection and documentation of any attempts by Marcus to return to my property or to harass me through unwanted contact that might escalate to stalking or other criminal behavior that would require intervention from law enforcement agencies that were equipped to deal with domestic abuse situations and protective orders. The cameras and motion sensors that were installed around my property would provide evidence of any violations of the boundaries I was establishing, while also serving as deterrence to someone who might otherwise attempt to continue his pattern of intimidation and control through physical presence or property damage. The morning when Marcus returned to what he had apparently assumed was still his home provided the first test of the new security measures and the first demonstration of how quickly someone who had seemed so powerful and controlling could be reduced to helpless frustration when their access to resources and support was suddenly eliminated by someone they had underestimated and abused. The security footage captured his increasingly agitated attempts to enter the house using keys that no longer worked, followed by his angry phone calls and text messages demanding explanations and threatening legal action that revealed his complete inability to accept responsibility for the consequences of his own behavior. The legal consultation I had arranged provided clear guidance about my rights as a homeowner to exclude someone who had no legal claim to my property and who had been residing there only as my guest rather than as a tenant with any protected status under local housing laws. The attorney's confirmation that Marcus had no legal recourse for challenging his exclusion from my home was accompanied by advice about documenting any harassment or threats that might occur, as he struggled to accept the reality that his free ride and position of power had been permanently terminated by someone he had assumed would never have the strength or resources to challenge his control. The restraining order that I filed based on Marcus's increasingly threatening communications and his attempts to manipulate mutual acquaintances into pressuring me to resume our relationship provided legal protection, while also creating an official record of his abusive behavior that would be available if future legal action became necessary to ensure my safety and peace of mind. The process of documenting the patterns of abuse and control that had characterized our relationship was both difficult and therapeutic, as it required me to articulate and validate experiences that Marcus had trained me to minimize or ignore through his constant gaslighting and emotional manipulation. The immediate aftermath of excluding Marcus from my home and my life was marked by a combination of relief, anxiety, and the gradual return of mental clarity and emotional stability that had been absent throughout the months of psychological abuse that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth and independence. The silence and peace of my home without his constant criticism and demands allowed me to begin processing the trauma of our relationship, while also rediscovering interests and activities that had been neglected or forbidden during the period when his needs and moods had dominated every aspect of my daily life and decision-making. The financial recovery that began immediately after Marcus's exclusion from my household revealed the extent to which his presence had been draining my resources through both direct expenses and the opportunity costs associated with supporting someone who contributed nothing while demanding everything from someone who had been working hard to build security and stability for what she had mistakenly believed was a shared future. The elimination of his expenses and demands allowed me to redirect funds toward paying down debt, rebuilding savings, and investing in personal and professional development that would strengthen my independence and create options for a future that was no longer constrained by someone else's limitations and selfishness. The professional renaissance that followed my liberation from Marcus's constant criticism and sabotage was immediate and dramatic, as my performance and enthusiasm at work returned to previous levels, while my confidence and creativity flourished without the constant negative input that had been undermining my abilities and satisfaction with career achievements that had always been sources of pride and identity. The promotion and salary increase that I received within months of ending our relationship validated my worth and potential in ways that contrasted sharply with Marcus's attempts to convince me that I was incompetent and lucky, rather than skilled and deserving of success. The social reconnection with friends and family members who had been excluded from my life during Marcus's campaign of isolation provided immediate emotional support and validation, while also helping me understand how dramatically my personality and happiness had been suppressed during the months when his approval and moods had controlled my social interactions and relationship with people who genuinely cared about my well-being. The warmth and relief expressed by friends who had watched helplessly as I disappeared into an abusive relationship reminded me of the love and support that had always been available from people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide for them. The personal growth and healing that began in the weeks following Marcus's exclusion from my life included therapy and self-reflection that helped me understand how I had become vulnerable to his manipulation and what changes I needed to make to prevent similar abuse in future relationships with people who might attempt to exploit my kindness and generosity for their own selfish purposes. The process of rebuilding my self-esteem and independence was challenging, but ultimately rewarding as I rediscovered interests, goals, and aspects of my personality that had been suppressed or discouraged during the months when Marcus's needs and preferences had taken priority over my own development and happiness. The legal resolution of Marcus's attempts to claim some right to my property or compensation for what he characterized as his investment in our relationship was swift and definitive, as the evidence clearly showed that he had contributed nothing except demands and abuse while benefiting from my generosity and support throughout our time together. His threats of legal action proved to be empty bluffs designed to intimidate someone he still believed could be manipulated through fear and guilt about ending a relationship that had been beneficial only to him while causing significant harm to my finances, career, and emotional well-being. Today, 2 years after changing the locks on my house and excluding Marcus from my life permanently, I have rebuilt my career, relationships, and sense of self-worth, while also using my experience to help other women recognize and escape from similar patterns of abuse and control that are often disguised as love and care, but that actually serve to exploit and diminish their victims. The house that Marcus had treated as his own while contributing nothing remains my sanctuary and investment, now enhanced by security systems and filled with the peace and happiness that come from living authentically, without fear of criticism or control, from someone who mistakes kindness for weakness. The relationship skills and self-awareness that I developed through therapy and reflection have prepared me for healthier connections with people who understand that love involves mutual respect, support, and consideration, rather than the one-sided arrangements that had characterized my relationship with Marcus, and that I will never again accept as normal or tolerable in my personal life. The boundaries and standards that I have established for future relationships are based on lessons learned through painful experience, but also on a renewed understanding of my own worth and the kind of treatment that I deserve from people who want to be part of my life. The professional success and financial security that I have achieved since ending my relationship with Marcus demonstrate that his assessment of my abilities and worth was not only cruel, but completely inaccurate, as I have exceeded my previous achievements while also building wealth and independence that provide options and security for whatever challenges or opportunities the future might bring. The confidence and satisfaction that come from knowing that my success is entirely my own accomplishment, not dependent on anyone else's approval or support, provide a foundation of strength that will protect me from future attempts at manipulation or control by people who underestimate my capabilities and resilience. Looking back on Marcus's declaration that I was nothing without him, and the swift action I took to demonstrate exactly who was dependent on whom in our toxic relationship, I realized that his cruelty actually provided the motivation and clarity I needed to reclaim my life from someone who had been systematically destroying my happiness and self-worth while benefiting from my generosity and support. The locks that I changed were not just physical barriers, but symbolic representations of the boundaries and self-respect that had been missing from a relationship where my kindness had been mistaken for weakness, and my love had been exploited by someone incapable of genuine reciprocity or respect. The lesson that emerged from this experience is that people who attempt to control and diminish others through psychological abuse often reveal their own weakness and dependence, when their victims find the strength to establish boundaries and refuse to continue accepting treatment that is beneath their dignity and worth. Marcus's reaction to losing access to my home and support revealed that he had been the dependent party in our relationship, despite his attempts to convince me otherwise through manipulation and emotional terrorism that temporarily succeeded in confusing my perceptions of reality and my own capabilities. Was I justified in changing the locks and excluding Marcus from my house immediately after his cruel declaration about my supposed worthlessness? Or should I have given him more time to collect his belongings and find alternative housing? Should someone who has been financially and emotionally supporting an abusive partner be expected to provide transition assistance when ending the relationship? Or do the circumstances of abuse eliminate any obligations for gradual separation that might provide more opportunities for manipulation and control? Would you have responded differently if someone who had been living in your house at your expense told you that you were nothing without them? Sometimes the most powerful response to psychological abuse and control is swift action that demonstrates the abuser's actual dependence on their victim, while establishing boundaries that protect the victim's safety, resources, and recovery from someone who has mistaken generosity for weakness and love for desperation.